I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It started with a thermos. I'd left it outside her door one rainy evening, forgotten in my hurry, and the next morning she had it perched neatly on the edge of the step. No note, no words, just the thermos. I hesitated before picking it up, my fingers brushing against hers for the briefest instant, and I realized I was already memorizing that small, quiet motion. I live in the bottom unit of her house, the one with the creaky wooden floors and the faint smell of lavender that hangs in the air, clinging to her curtains and the edges of the furniture. I see her almost every day, though we barely speak. She moves through her mornings like a slow film, folding laundry with care, running a hand through her hair in the way she always seems to do when no one's watching. This morning I found her in the kitchen, standing in the half-light that drifts through the window. She was humming something I didn't recognize, and I tried to swallow the sudden warmth that rose in my chest. My coffee cooled in the mug I hadn't touched yet, and I kept noticing little things. How she tucked the loose strand of grey hair behind her ear, how her fingers lingered on the edge of the counter, as if the surface itself had stories. "Your thermos," she said finally, her voice soft, like a page turning. "You left it outside again." "Yeah," I muttered, fiddling with the zipper of my backpack. "Thanks." My eyes flicked toward her hands, then back to my shoes, like looking directly at her would give away something I didn't have words for. She smiled, just slightly, and I swear it made the light in the room shift. "I was going to drink the tea, but I remembered it was yours." I wanted to say something clever, something that would make this moment ours, but all I managed was a half smile. Instead, I watched her carry the thermos to the sink, the clink of ceramic against porcelain louder than it should have been. My pulse ticked along with it, quiet and steady, like the low hum of the refrigerator. I've grown used to this, the almost conversations, the silent acknowledgements. I carry my loneliness in small, private ways. An unsent text I type and delete, a thought I pause halfway because it's too much to say aloud. I fold napkins in the cafe where I sit alone, notice how the edges line up too perfectly, and wonder if anyone else notices things that small. Maybe she does. Maybe she doesn't. Her eyes caught mine across the kitchen, and I felt something I can't name. Not exactly longing, not yet, but a kind of recognition, like a faint echo of something that belonged to neither of us entirely, but felt close. I looked away first, scuffing the floor with the toe of my sneaker, hoping she didn't see how fast my heart had picked up. "I think I'll go," I said, my voice too loud in the quiet. I felt like I was breaking some invisible rule, like leaving would undo the balance we'd both quietly maintained. She didn't stop me. Just nodded, a tilt of her head that held more than agreement. And when I reached the door, she added, "See you later, maybe." I paused with my hand on the doorknob, my chest tight with something like anticipation. Maybe. Not a yes, not a no. Just maybe. I left, and the thermos, her careful placement, her absent-minded smile, lingered with me. And then, my phone buzzed. A message. From her. Not a reply to anything I'd sent, nothing I had expected. Just a single line, "Don't forget the tea this time." And suddenly, the day felt longer, heavier, sweeter. I found her in the kitchen again the next morning, pouring tea from a chipped kettle into two mismatched mugs. She handed me one without a word, and I took it carefully, like holding something fragile. "You drink it black?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost checking if I'd changed my mind since yesterday. "Yeah," I said. I watched her, the way her fingers lingered around the handle of the mug, the faint tremor in her wrist I almost didn't notice. She hesitated, then said, "I used to make this for my son. Every morning before school." Her gaze dropped to the tea, swirling faint patterns in the liquid. "He's older now. Doesn't need it." I nodded, unsure what to say. A small truth, shared in a glance, in a gesture of making tea. And I felt the tug in my chest, the kind that makes you aware of the quiet divide between us. Divorced. 40-something. Me, barely out of college. We sat together at the small kitchen table. Silence settled around us, thick like steam rising from the mugs. I imagined what it would feel like to reach across the table, to rest my hand over hers. My mind ran through scenarios I didn't allow myself to speak aloud. She laughed quietly at something I said half-heartedly, and it hit me, how dangerous it would be to care this much. There's a line, isn't there? One you don't cross. I felt it everywhere, in her casual glances, in the tilt of her shoulder, in the way I lingered just a fraction too long near the counter when she washed dishes. I didn't know what to do with the thermos yesterday, I said finally, fiddling with the edge of the table. Thought I'd just leave it outside. Didn't expect, I trailed off. I didn't expect her to notice. Didn't expect her to care. She smiled faintly, a tilt of lips that said more than words could. You always forget things, she said softly, but somehow, I remember for both of us. I felt my throat tighten. That small, ordinary kindness felt heavier than any confession I'd ever made. I wanted to tell her about the texts I never sent, the late-night pauses where I'd imagined her laughing at me, the way I pressed my palm to the cool edge of my bedroom wall thinking of her. Instead, I watched her stack the mugs, her hands brushing mine by accident. I didn't pull away. She didn't either. A gesture, small, accidental, or maybe not. A spark in silence that said everything we weren't saying. And then she looked up, her eyes catching mine, warm but unreadable. I smiled awkwardly, my chest tight with anticipation. Thanks, I said, though I didn't know what for exactly. Her gaze lingered on me, steady and soft. And then she nodded, as if to anchor the moment in the air between us. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I found her watering the small plants on the windowsill when I came home that evening. The air smelled faintly of soil and rain, a quiet comfort, but something about the light on her hair made me pause at the doorway. I didn't mean to watch, but my hands lingered on the doorknob longer than they should have. She glanced up, and for a second, I thought I saw the same spark from the kitchen, that little acknowledgement of something unspoken. But then her eyes flicked away, back to the tiny green leaves, and the tension in her shoulders told me she was pulling back before I could step closer. I shifted, pretending to check my phone, though I wasn't looking at it. She hummed softly, avoiding my gaze. It made my chest tighten, that distance we maintained even when nothing seemed between us. Do you want help with the watering? I asked, my voice awkward, too loud for the silence. She shook her head. No, it's fine. The faint edge in her tone, polite, careful, made me wonder what line I'd already crossed without knowing. I lingered anyway, leaning against the wall, watching her hands, the way she tilted her head, the small pauses she made between droplets of water. I imagined touching her hair, brushing it back the way she did herself, imagined the warmth of her hand if I ever held it. The thoughts raced and halted before I could even form the words. A sudden knock at the door startled us both. My friend from downstairs popped in, grinning, holding a package. Delivery for your upstairs neighbor, he said, not realizing I was standing there too. She jumped slightly, and I stepped back. The moment shattered. He left, laughing at his own timing, and I caught her eyes, brief, electric, then closed off. We returned to silence, both pretending to ignore the flutter in our chests. I fidgeted with the hem of my shirt, noticing how close she was now, how the soft curve of her shoulder brushed mine when she moved to the sink. Her hand lingered a second too long over the faucet, and I almost reached out. Almost. I should go, I said finally, though neither of us moved. Her eyes met mine, steady but unreadable, holding the tension that neither of us could put into words. My chest tightened, breath caught somewhere in the middle of wanting and not wanting, and for a fraction of a second, I imagined leaning forward, closing the gap, letting the world fall away for just that moment. I stopped myself. She looked at me like she'd felt the thought, maybe even welcomed it, but the tilt of her jaw, the faint pause before she nodded, reminded me of the line we couldn't cross. I left, shoulders tight, heart racing, carrying the weight of what almost happened. The smell of rain, soil, and her presence lingered long after the door shut. And I knew that somewhere between the hesitation and the longing, the next step would either be reckless, or the one thing we couldn't undo. She didn't answer my text that morning. Not a single word, just left me staring at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard like I might erase everything, or send something I'd regret. I found her later on the small bench by the park, tucked under the bare branches of a tree. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers laced, shoulders tight. She didn't look up when I approached. I stopped a few steps away, unsure if I was intruding, if this was a line I had no right to cross. "You didn't text back," I said finally, voice quiet, almost swallowed by the soft rustle of the wind. "DDD," she shrugged, a faint tilt of her chin, not meeting my eyes. I've been busy." Her voice sounded distant, but not angry. Careful. Protective, like she was guarding something fragile inside. I noticed the edge of tension in her jaw, how her fingers pressed into her palms. "Did I do something?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. Her gaze flicked to mine, a fraction of a second, and then away. "I don't know," she whispered. Maybe I'm not supposed to feel," she trailed off, words dissolving into the space between us. My chest tightened. The quiet she carried made the air heavy. I wanted to reach out, to say anything that might untangle the knots between us, but my hands hovered uselessly at my sides. Instead, I leaned forward slightly, careful not to close the space, careful not to frighten her. I stopped, letting the words fall into the empty air. "I like being around you. I don't want to mess it up." My voice cracked, tiny, almost swallowed by the wind. Her lips parted, like she wanted to answer, to say more, but the words didn't come. She shifted, pulling her knees closer, a small, deliberate retreat. The bench felt smaller suddenly, too close for comfort, too close for what we both wanted and feared. I imagined what it would feel like to brush a hand against hers, to let the gap vanish, to see if she'd meet me halfway, or pull away completely. Her eyes finally met mine, and I saw the vulnerability there. The fear. The restraint. The guilt, maybe. And I realized she'd been holding back for both our sakes, and that made me ache in ways I hadn't named before. "I don't know if I should. I don't know if I can," she murmured, voice barely above the rustle of leaves. I swallowed hard, words stuck somewhere in my throat, and just nodded, as if agreeing with her unspoken thought. The air between us held everything we weren't saying, the near confessions, the longing, the risk. I wanted to ask her something. Something irreversible. But the moment stretched, quiet and fragile, and all I could do was shift slightly, letting the wind carry my hesitation. Her hand twitched, almost reaching toward mine, then stopped. And I realized I had to ask, though I didn't know how, "Do you want me to stay?" The question hung, unanswered, and I could feel the weight of what would come next. I stopped by her door that evening, my bag slung over one shoulder, a tentative hope settling in my chest. I'd rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd ask her to meet me for a walk, for tea, for something real. She opened the door halfway, just enough for the light from the hallway to catch her face. And then I saw it, an old photograph tucked behind the frame of a shelf. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, grinning like the world belonged to him. "Oh," she said softly, as if noticing my glance for the first time. "That's him." I nodded, though the words lodged somewhere between surprise and confusion. "Him?" My son, she said. The way she said it, gentle, almost apologetic, made the air between us shift, suddenly heavier, layered with the weight of things I hadn't known. The thermos, the laughter, the quiet moments, they all carried a new context I hadn't imagined. I started, but she cut me off with a small shake of her head. You didn't know. I didn't think you needed to. I realized then how much I'd built in the spaces between us, assumptions, imaginings, tentative hope, and how little I actually knew about her. About the life that existed beyond my corner of her world. We stood there, silence pressing in, the small hallway stretching longer than it should have. My hands twitched at my sides, wanting to reach for hers, for reassurance, but I didn't. She didn't step closer either. I have a routine, she said finally, her voice calm, but carrying an edge I hadn't noticed before. He comes home in the evenings. Dinner. Homework. It's complicated. I swallowed hard, heart fluttering in the way it did when she looked at me from across the kitchen, but now shadowed by something I couldn't touch. Complicated. Life outside these walls. Boundaries I hadn't considered. I nodded, unsure what to say, unsure if my presence had crossed a line or merely lingered at the edge of one. I felt a strange kind of hope and despair at the same time, hope that she was still here, despair that there was so much I couldn't reach. I should go, I said finally, though neither of us moved toward a conclusion. My voice sounded hollow in my own ears. She nodded, eyes flicking to the photograph, then back to the door. Yeah, she said. Maybe later. I lingered, the door half closed between us, her presence just beyond the threshold. I wanted to say something more, confess, clarify, reach, but the words stuck. My chest ached in quiet anticipation, and then I stepped back. The hallway was empty when I walked away. No message left. No knock. No invitation. Just the faint smell of her tea, the echo of her voice, the photograph I couldn't stop thinking about. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I found her in the kitchen again, the evening light cutting across the tiles in thin, golden lines. The air smelled faintly of tea and rain, the same as before, familiar and grounding. She was stacking plates slowly, deliberately, as if each movement could steady the world. I hesitated at the threshold. My chest felt tight, the words lodged somewhere between wanting and knowing I might lose more than I gained. I wanted to step forward, to speak, to confess the quiet ache I'd carried for weeks, but I also wanted to step back, to preserve the fragile balance between us. I started, voice breaking slightly, then stopped. My hands twisted together at my sides. She looked up, eyes soft but wary, as if she already knew what I would say and feared it. You don't have to, she murmured. Her hands paused mid-motion over a mug, the gesture small, almost accidental, but it carried more meaning than any words could. I swallowed. I can't. I let the sentence trail, like so many before, letting the weight of unsaid words fill the room. I wanted to tell her I liked her, that every quiet glance, every shared moment, had carved itself into me. But I didn't. She set the mug down gently, the clink louder than expected, and stepped closer. You don't have to say it, she said again. Her voice was steady now, but her eyes flickered to the floor for a heartbeat. Sometimes, just being here is enough. I felt a pull, sudden and sharp, between what I wanted and what I dared. I imagined reaching for her hand, letting mine brush against hers, and then I let the moment hang. The air hummed with everything we weren't saying. And then, almost without thinking, she placed her hand on the edge of mine, fingertips barely touching. No grand gesture, no flourish. Just a connection so small it could have been overlooked. And yet, it held everything, the longing, the risk, the vulnerability. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my chest loosening just a fraction. I wanted to speak, to bridge the gap, but the quiet understanding between us was enough. Sometimes, words would only ruin what we already had. She gave a tiny, almost shy smile, the kind that makes your stomach flip without exaggeration. "Okay," she said softly. I nodded. "Okay," I echoed, letting the word settle between us like a promise, without needing to define it. For a long moment, we just stayed there, hand near hand, the kitchen humming softly around us. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. Just presence. Just acknowledgement. I realized then that vulnerability didn't always have to be explosive. Sometimes it was this, small, honest, and quietly devastating. And that was enough. Months passed, quietly, the way mornings stretch without warning. I still brewed my black coffee at 8:47 a.m. The time she'd joked once was too exact for human beings. She teased me lightly now, brushing the rim of my mug with her finger, and I smiled, letting her presence settle into the small routines of my life. We still walked past the same park bench where our tension had once nearly undone us. Now, I carried an extra mug of tea in my backpack, and she carried a thermos that never went forgotten. We didn't announce anything, didn't declare it on banners or in grand gestures. We simply arrived, side by side, each step small and deliberate. The house smelled faintly of her lavender, of rain-soaked earth after she watered the plants. I helped with the dishes sometimes, not out of obligation, but because the rhythm of it felt like care. She'd glance at me across the sink, and there it was again, that same quiet acknowledgement, the one that made the silence between us feel full instead of empty. Sometimes she'd hum while folding laundry, and I'd watch, noticing how her hands moved now with ease, the way she no longer flinched at my presence, how we'd both learned to inhabit the same space without fear. Other times, I caught her staring at me, a faint smile tugging at her lips, as if remembering the thermos, the bench, the whispered "okay" we'd shared months before. We talked in fragments now, unfinished thoughts, pauses, awkward laughter. I found it more honest than anything else, less pressure, more presence. Even when life intruded, her son calling from school, errands, deadlines, we carried our connection in the quiet spaces. A shared tea, a brush of hands, a glance that lingered just a little too long. One rainy afternoon, we sat on the park bench together, sipping warm tea, our coats soaked at the edges. I let my shoulder touch hers, just slightly, the contact steady, safe. She didn't pull away. We didn't speak. And yet, everything necessary was said in the way the steam rose from our mugs, in the faint smiles we shared without words. I realized then that love didn't have to crash into the world to matter. It could exist in these soft, achingly ordinary ways, in the routine, in the half-finished sentences, in the tea, in the black coffee, at 8:47 a.m. And when she finally slipped her hand into mine, lightly, naturally, it wasn't the beginning of anything dramatic. It was the continuation of everything we'd already built, the slow, deliberate accumulation of trust, understanding, and quiet warmth. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the sky streaked with pinks and greys, I leaned slightly against her. She rested her head on my shoulder for a heartbeat. Only we knew that small weight, that small comfort, carried all the history, all the near misses, all the maybes we had survived. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel relieved. I felt exactly what I had always wanted, present, steady, and quietly home. Some things in life, like black coffee, like thermoses, like the small hum of a shared morning, carry more weight than words ever could. And for us, that was enough.